When I first met Megan, it felt like the world had tilted on its axis. She was bold, ambitious, and full of life. Everything I thought I wasn't but secretly wished to be. I was a 26-year-old IT consultant, spending most of my days buried in code and spreadsheets, while she was a 24-year-old firecracker on the fast track to corporate success. We met at a networking event, of all places, and it felt like fate. Megan was standing at the edge of the room, laughing at something her colleague said, and her confidence was magnetic. I must have looked like an awkward statue, holding my drink too tightly and overthinking my approach. But she noticed me before I could figure it out. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," she said, grinning as she walked up to me. I laughed nervously and admitted she wasn't wrong. From that moment, we clicked. Our first date turned into a second, and before long, we were inseparable. The early years of our marriage were everything I thought love should be: exciting, challenging, and full of shared dreams. We bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood, adopted a rescue dog we named Bailey, and built a life that felt solid and secure. Megan was my rock, and I was hers. She'd come home from work buzzing with stories about her latest project or how she'd outsmarted a client, and I'd listen, mesmerized by her drive and determination. She made me believe we could conquer anything together. But somewhere along the way, things began to shift. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Megan's job at her new firm, a prestigious corporate powerhouse, demanded more of her time. Late nights became the norm, and weekends that used to be spent hiking or binge-watching shows turned into marathon work sessions. "I'm sorry, babe," she'd say, her eyes apologetic but resolute. "It's just for now. Once I get through this project, things will calm down." But for now stretched into months and then years. I told myself it was normal, that this was what success looked like. I wanted to be supportive, to cheer her on from the sidelines like I always had. But as her career soared, I couldn't help but feel like I was being left behind. Then there was Alex. At first, he was just a name, her new boss, someone she admired for his sharp mind and ability to command a room. "Alex is a genius," she'd say, her voice filled with admiration. "He makes everything look so effortless." I didn't think much of it. Everyone has a mentor or someone they look up to. But as time went on, Alex became more than just a passing mention. Megan would come home talking about his strategies, his jokes, his advice. At first, it sounded professional, but there was a spark in her eyes when she spoke about him that I hadn't seen in a while. The late nights started to weigh on me. Dinners grew cold on the table, plans were canceled, and our conversations became clipped and transactional. "Don't wait up," she'd text, leaving me to eat alone more often than not. When I'd bring it up, she'd wave it off. "It's work, Ryan. You know how demanding it is." And I did. But it didn't make the loneliness any easier. The cracks in our marriage grew wider with every missed moment. I'd watch her get ready for work, her attention to detail sharper than it used to be. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, clothes that seemed more tailored, more intentional. One evening, I made a comment about how much effort she was putting into her appearance. "New dress?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just something for work," she replied, brushing it off as if it were nothing. But it wasn't nothing. I could feel the distance between us, like a shadow creeping into every corner of our life. Looking back, I wonder if I saw it coming. The missed dinners, the guarded phone habits, the way she'd light up when she mentioned Alex. It was all there. A slow unraveling of the life we'd built together. But denial is a powerful thing. I wanted to believe that we were still the couple who could conquer anything, that the cracks were just temporary and that we'd find our way back to each other. I didn't realize then how wrong I was. The first time Megan mentioned Alex, it seemed harmless enough. She came home one evening, kicked off her heels, and launched into a story about a team meeting at work. "My boss, Alex, has this way of explaining things," she said, her tone admiring. "He just makes everything seem so simple, even when the client is being impossible. It's like magic." I smiled and nodded, not thinking much of it. Everyone has that one boss they look up to, the one who seems larger than life. I figured Alex was just that for Megan. But what started as casual mentions quickly turned into something more. Alex was 42, Megan told me, with a sharp mind and an even sharper wardrobe. He'd built the company from the ground up, transforming it into a powerhouse in their industry. She admired his ambition, his confidence, his ability to take control of any situation. At first, I tried to share in her enthusiasm. "Sounds like a good guy to learn from," I said one evening as she recounted another story about how Alex handled a tricky client. But as the weeks went on, Alex's name began to dominate our conversations. It wasn't just his work ethic anymore. It was his charisma, his charm, the way he always knew the right thing to say. "Alex suggested I take on a bigger role in this project," she'd say, her eyes lighting up. Or, "Alex thinks I have real potential to move up in the company." I wanted to be supportive, but something about the way she talked about him started to bother me. There was a spark in her voice when she mentioned Alex, a kind of excitement that felt different from the way she talked about anything else. The first real red flag came when Megan started attending more and more office events, networking mixers, client dinners, late-night brainstorming sessions. At first, I didn't think much of it. Her job was demanding, and I knew networking was part of the game. But then the invitations stopped including me. "This one's just for the team," she said one evening as she slipped on a dress I hadn't seen before. "You wouldn't want to be stuck listening to boring work talk all night?" I frowned. "I don't mind. I like meeting your coworkers." She hesitated, adjusting her earrings. It's more casual, you know? I don't want you to feel out of place." It felt like a flimsy excuse, but I didn't press her. I trusted her. At least, I wanted to. Then came the nights when she'd come home late, smelling faintly of expensive cologne. "Long night?" I asked once, trying to keep my tone light. She nodded, setting her bag down on the counter. Dinner ran over. Alex insisted we go over the presentation one last time before tomorrow's pitch. I forced a smile, but my stomach churned. I didn't say anything, but the scent lingered in the air long after she went to bed. The turning point came during one of our rare evenings together. We were sitting on the couch, sharing a bottle of wine, when I noticed her scrolling through her phone with a small smile on her lips. "What's so funny?" I asked, leaning over to peek at the screen. She quickly locked her phone and set it aside. "Oh, just a funny email from Alex. He has the weirdest sense of humor." That knot in my stomach tightened. "You seem to talk about him a lot," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. She shrugged. "He's my boss. It's normal." "Normal," I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. The more Alex's name surfaced, the more uneasy I became. He wasn't just a boss anymore. He was a presence in our lives, even when he wasn't physically there. I started to notice the subtle shifts in Megan's behavior. She was dressing sharper, putting more effort into her appearance, and spending more time on her phone, often smiling at messages I couldn't see. When I brought it up, she brushed it off. "You're being paranoid," she said, her tone dismissive. "Alex is just a colleague. You have nothing to worry about." But I did worry. Because the way she talked about Alex wasn't just professional admiration anymore. It was something else, something deeper. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, the nagging feeling in my gut refused to go away. Looking back, I wish I'd trusted that feeling sooner. But at the time, I wanted to believe that I was imagining things, that our marriage was stronger than some charming boss with a nice cologne and a way with words. Red flags have a funny way of creeping into your life. At first, they're subtle enough to ignore, small things that don't seem important on their own. But eventually, they pile up until they're impossible to dismiss. For me, it started with Megan's appearance. She'd always taken care of herself, but lately, it was different. Her casual work outfits were replaced with sleek, tailored dresses, her makeup more precise and dramatic than before. Even her perfume changed, something sharper, more alluring than the light floral scent she used to wear. One morning, as she stood in front of the mirror adjusting a new necklace, I commented on how put together she looked. "Big meeting today?" I asked, sipping my coffee. She smiled without looking at me. "Not really, just felt like dressing up." That wasn't like her. Megan was practical, not someone who fussed over appearances unless there was a reason. "You've been dressing up a lot lately," I said, trying to keep my tone light. She turned, raising an eyebrow. "Is that a problem?" "No," I said quickly. "You look great, just noticing." She shrugged and went back to fixing her hair, but the seed of doubt was already planted. Then there were the phone calls. I'd walk into the room and hear her on the phone with Alex, her tone playful and light. "Stop it, Alex," she said once, laughing softly. "You're terrible." She didn't notice me standing in the doorway, but the flirtatious edge in her voice made my stomach twist. When I asked her about it later, she brushed it off. "That's just how Alex is," she said, rolling her eyes. "He jokes around with everyone. Don't overthink it." Maybe she was right, but the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. Our friends began to notice the tension between us. My best friend Liam was the first to call it out. "You okay?" he asked over beers one night. I hesitated, not sure how much to share. "Things are complicated." Liam nodded knowingly. "It's Megan, isn't it?" I looked up sharply. "What makes you say that?" He leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "You don't want to be the guy who misses what's happening right under his nose, Ryan. Pay attention." His words stuck with me, even as Megan's sister, Rachel, dismissed my concerns entirely. "You're being ridiculous," she said during a family dinner. "Megan loves her job. Just because she's ambitious doesn't mean there's something going on with her boss. You're being insecure." But it didn't feel like insecurity. It felt like a storm brewing just beyond the horizon. The breaking point came at a corporate gala Megan insisted I attend. "It'll be fun," she said, flashing me a bright smile. "You'll get to meet my team and see what I've been working on." The event was lavish, with crystal chandeliers and a sea of perfectly dressed professionals. Megan looked stunning in a floor-length gown, her confidence radiating as she mingled with colleagues. During her speech, she commanded the room, her voice steady and poised. I couldn't help but feel proud, but that pride quickly soured when I noticed Alex standing off to the side, watching her intently. He wasn't just listening. He was staring, the kind of stare that made my blood boil. His eyes lingered on her like she was the only person in the room. And Megan seemed to bask in it. When she finished and the crowd applauded, Alex was the first to approach her, placing a hand on her back as he whispered something in her ear. She laughed, leaning in slightly, and my gut churned. That night, as we drove home, I couldn't keep it in any longer. "Alex couldn't take his eyes off you during your speech," I said, trying to sound casual but failing. Megan glanced at me, her expression unreadable. "He's my boss, Ryan. He was just being supportive." "Supportive," I echoed, the word tasting bitter. "You're reading too much into this," she said, her tone sharp. "Alex respects me, that's it." But I wasn't convinced. The red flags were no longer subtle. They were glaring, impossible to ignore. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away, just beyond my reach. The argument began like most of our recent ones, small, almost insignificant, until it spiraled into something much larger. It started over dinner, a quiet evening where the air between us felt heavier than usual. Megan was scrolling through her phone while I pushed my food around my plate, trying to decide whether to bring up what had been eating away at me for weeks. I couldn't take it anymore. "Megan," I said, setting my fork down with a deliberate clink. "We need to talk." She barely looked up. "What's wrong now?" The casual dismissal stung, but I pressed on. "It's about Alex." Her eyes flicked to mine, narrowing slightly. "What about him?" I hesitated, searching for the right words, but frustration won out. You think I don't see the way he looks at you? The way he undresses you with his eyes every chance he gets? She froze for a moment, her phone hovering above the table. Then, she let out a sharp laugh that sent a chill down my spine. Are you serious right now? Yes, I'm serious, I said, my voice rising. You might think it's harmless, but it's not. He's crossing boundaries, and you're letting him. Her expression hardened. Alex is my boss, Ryan. He respects me and my work. Just because you're insecure doesn't mean there's something inappropriate going on. Insecure? I shot back, my anger bubbling over. This has nothing to do with insecurity and everything to do with the fact that you're letting another man, your boss, get too close. And worse, you seem to enjoy it. Her chair scraped against the floor as she stood, glaring at me. You think I enjoy it? Fine. Then watch closely, Ryan, because I'm about to make it obvious. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, stunned by her audacity, by how far she was willing to push me. Are you listening to yourself right now? I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. Are you? She countered, crossing her arms. All you ever do is criticize. You don't support me, you don't understand my career, and now you're accusing me of something that doesn't even exist. This isn't about your career, Megan. It's about our marriage. Something you seem to have forgotten about. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Don't act like you're a saint, Ryan. You've been distant for months. Maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't need to rely on someone else for validation. Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her deflect. You're playing with fire, Megan, I said, my tone low and controlled. And I'm telling you right now, I'm gone before the music stops. She blinked, her confidence faltering for just a moment. What's that supposed to mean? It means I won't sit here and watch you destroy everything we've built, I said, grabbing my keys from the counter. You've made your priorities clear and they don't include me. Ryan, don't, she started, but I cut her off. No, Megan, I've done enough waiting, enough hoping. If Alex is what you want, then fine. But don't expect me to stick around and watch. Without waiting for her response, I walked out, the door slamming behind me. As I sat in my car, the reality of what just happened began to sink in. My hands gripped the steering wheel as my chest heaved, anger and heartbreak warring within me. I'd always imagined that if it came to this, I'd feel some sense of closure, of clarity. But all I felt was a hollow ache, a gnawing realization that the woman I fell in love with had become a stranger. The weight of her words, "Then watch closely," hung in the air like a cruel echo. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her disrespect our marriage any longer. As the engine roared to life, I made a silent vow to myself. I'd fight for my dignity, for my peace, even if it meant walking away from the woman I once thought I'd spend forever with. Liam didn't ask too many questions when I showed up at his door with a duffel bag slung over my shoulder and a look that probably screamed wrecked. That was one of the things I appreciated most about him, his ability to read the room and give me space when I needed it. "Spare room's yours," he said, stepping aside and clapping me on the shoulder. "Beer's in the fridge. Talk when you're ready." I nodded silently and walked in, the weight of the past few days pressing down on me like a ton of bricks. The first few nights at Liam's place were the hardest. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the argument with Megan in my mind, dissecting every word she'd said. Then watch closely, because I'm about to make it obvious. Those words haunted me. Was she trying to hurt me, or had she truly lost sight of what we'd built together? Either way, it felt like a betrayal I couldn't ignore. During the day, I threw myself into work, staying late at the office just to avoid the quiet moments where my thoughts would creep in. Liam, ever the supportive friend, tried to pull me out of my head. "You need to talk to someone about this," he said one evening over beers. "I'm talking to you. I said, attempting a weak smile. He shook his head. I mean someone who knows what they're doing. A therapist. You can't keep carrying this alone, man. I resisted at first, but eventually Liam's words sank in. I needed help. Someone to guide me through the mess that had become my life. Therapy was a strange experience at first. Sitting across from Dr. Wilson, I wasn't sure where to start. How do you condense years of love, resentment, and heartbreak into a single conversation? Start with how you're feeling right now, she said gently, as if she could sense my hesitation. I took a deep breath and began talking. About Megan, about Alex, about the moment I realized our marriage might not survive. As the sessions went on, I found myself uncovering layers of emotions I didn't even know were there. She prioritized him over us, I said during one session, my voice tinged with frustration. I thought we were building a life together, but maybe I was the only one who cared about that. Dr. Wilson leaned forward slightly. Do you think Megan values your marriage as much as you do? Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. The truth was, I didn't know anymore, and that uncertainty hurt more than anything else. While I was working to process my emotions, Megan was facing her own fallout. From what I heard through mutual friends, Alex wasted no time taking advantage of my absence. He's invited me to dinner, she told one of her co-workers, according to Rachel, Megan's sister, just to talk about the next big project. But it didn't stop at one dinner. Late-night meetings became frequent, and Alex's subtle flirtations turned into something more overt. Megan, it seemed, had underestimated his intentions. Alex is brilliant, but he's intense, Rachel told me when she called to check in. Megan mentioned feeling uncomfortable lately. I think she's realizing he's not as harmless as she thought. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, wanted to see Megan squirm in the trap she'd walked into. But another part of me, the part that still cared about her despite everything, felt an ache of pity. She'd let herself be swept up in Alex's charm, and now she was paying the price. As the days turned into weeks, I began to feel a strange sense of clarity. Living with Liam, attending therapy, and focusing on myself gave me the space I needed to reflect on what I wanted moving forward. Megan had made her choices, and so had I. While I couldn't control her actions, I could control my own. I was done waiting for her to realize my worth. It was time to prioritize myself for once. The next time Liam asked how I was doing, I gave him an honest answer. I'm not okay, I said, but I'm getting there. He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. That's all you can do, man. One step at a time. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I'd come out of this stronger. When word of our separation started to spread, it was like a bomb went off in our social circle. Suddenly, everyone had an opinion about what had happened. Some supportive, others less so, and it felt like I was living under a microscope. Liam, as always, was firmly in my corner. You did the right thing, man, he said one evening as we sat on his back porch, beers in hand. Megan crossed a line and you stood up for yourself. That's not something to feel guilty about. I nodded, appreciating his unwavering support. Liam wasn't the type to sugarcoat things, and hearing him validate my feelings was a small comfort in the chaos. But not everyone saw things the same way. Rachel, Megan's sister, called me a week after I'd moved out. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. Ryan, she began, her tone clipped. What are you doing? You and Megan have been together for years, and now you're just walking away? It's not that simple, Rachel, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. Megan made choices that hurt our marriage. I needed space. She let out a frustrated sigh. She's been under a lot of pressure with work, and Alex, well, he's just a part of that environment. You're reading too much into this. Am I countered. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like she prioritized her boss over her husband. That's not fair, Rachel snapped. Megan loves you, she just... Made a mistake. A mistake she hasn't taken responsibility for, I said firmly. I can't keep pretending everything's fine, Rachel. The conversation ended on a tense note, with Rachel insisting that I reconsider and me standing my ground. The divide wasn't limited to family. Our mutual friends quickly began taking sides, and their opinions added another layer of complexity to an already messy situation. You can't just leave her, Ryan, said Kate, a friend we'd known since college. Marriage is about fighting for each other, even when things get tough. I clenched my jaw, trying to hold back my frustration. I fought, Kate. I've been fighting for years. But it takes two people to make a marriage work, and Megan hasn't been in this with me for a long time. Kate gave me a skeptical look, but she didn't push further. On the other hand, some of our friends were less forgiving of Megan's actions. Let me get this straight, Greg said, leaning forward during a group dinner. She spent all her time with this Alex guy, let him cross boundaries, and then expected you to just sit there and take it? You did the right thing walking away. Hearing their support helped, but it didn't erase the sting of feeling like my marriage had become a topic for gossip. Meanwhile, Megan was dealing with her own fallout. Rachel told me that whispers about her relationship with Alex were circulating at work. People are starting to talk, Rachel confided during one of her attempts to mediate. Some of her coworkers think she's too close to Alex, and it's making things awkward for her. I couldn't say I was surprised. Alex wasn't exactly subtle in his behavior, and Megan's involvement with him, whether intentional or not, hadn't gone unnoticed. She brought this on herself, I said, my tone colder than I intended. Rachel sighed. You're not being fair, Ryan. She's struggling. So am I shot back. But I didn't create this mess. The divide in our social circle only deepened as time went on. Some friends started avoiding us altogether, unwilling to pick a side. Others tried to play peacemaker, suggesting that Megan and I attend counseling or find a way to reconcile. You don't have to let this be the end, Kate said during one such conversation. But it already felt like the end to me. The trust was gone, and without it, there was no foundation left to rebuild on. Through it all, Liam remained my rock. People are going to talk, he said one night, his voice steady. Let them. You know the truth, and that's all that matters. He was right, of course. The opinions of others, friends, family, co-workers, didn't change what had happened or how I felt. Megan's choices had fractured our marriage, and while she might be facing the consequences now, it didn't erase the damage. As the dust settled, I realized that no amount of opinions or advice could dictate what came next. This was my life, and I had to decide how to move forward, regardless of what anyone else thought. When I moved out, I thought I'd severed myself from Megan and her increasingly tangled web with Alex. But life has a way of dragging you back into the chaos, especially when unresolved threads keep pulling at you. The first hint came through a mutual acquaintance, Mark, who worked at Megan's company. We bumped into each other at a local coffee shop, and after a few pleasantries, the conversation turned toward Megan. I heard you two are going through some things, Mark said cautiously, his tone laced with curiosity and something else. Concern, maybe. Yeah, I replied, not wanting to dive into details. Things haven't been great. Mark hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. Look, I don't want to overstep, but I think you should know that Alex isn't as squeaky clean as he makes himself out to be. My grip tightened around my coffee cup. What do you mean? He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping. He has a reputation. Charms his way into people's good graces, crosses boundaries, then leaves them to deal with the fallout. A few people at the office have already raised concerns, but he's got enough influence to keep things quiet. Hearing this wasn't surprising. It confirmed what I'd suspected for months, but it still felt like a gut punch. I nodded, muttering a quick thanks, and left the coffee shop with a storm brewing in my head. Meanwhile, Megan was dealing with Alex in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. From what I gathered through Rachel, still determined to play mediator, Alex had started pushing boundaries in ways Megan couldn't ignore. "He's been inviting her to private dinners," Rachel said during one of her calls, her voice filled with concern. "He's dropping hints about how much he's helped her career and how he could do even more if she's willing to be flexible." I clenched my jaw, anger bubbling to the surface. "And she's still going along with it?" "She feels trapped," Rachel admitted. "She knows it looks bad, but she's afraid to push back. She thinks it'll ruin her career." I wanted to say, she's the one who let it get this far, but I bit my tongue. Liam, ever the voice of reason, urged me to confront Megan. "Not to get back together," he clarified when I shot him a skeptical look, "but to give her a reality check. She needs to see Alex for who he really is, and maybe hearing it from you will actually make her listen." I wasn't thrilled about the idea. Part of me wanted to wash my hands of the entire situation, to let Megan deal with the consequences of her choices on her own. But another part, the part that still cared about her, even after everything, felt compelled to step in. The opportunity came a few days later when Megan called, her voice hesitant and unsure. "Ryan," she began, "can we talk? In person?" I agreed, meeting her at a quiet park where we could speak without interruptions. She looked different, more tired, more subdued. Gone was the confident, polished version of Megan that Alex seemed to have cultivated. "What's on your mind?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She hesitated, then sighed. "I think I made a mistake." "Which one?" I asked, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. She flinched but pressed on. "Alex, he's been—" She paused, struggling to find the words. "He's been making me uncomfortable. At first, I thought it was just his personality, but now, it feels like he's using his position to get what he wants." "And you're just realizing this now?" I said, the frustration spilling out. "Megan, I've been telling you for months that he doesn't respect boundaries. You didn't listen." "I know," she said quietly, her eyes downcast. "I was wrong. I thought I could handle it, but now I don't know what to do." I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "You need to see Alex for what he is, a manipulative predator who preys on people like you. And if you don't push back now, he'll keep taking until there's nothing left." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't let myself soften. "This isn't just about your career, Megan. It's about your self-respect. If you don't stand up to him, no one else will." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "I'm scared, Ryan." "I know," I said, my voice softening slightly. "But you're stronger than you think. You just have to start believing it." As I walked away from that conversation, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief that Megan was finally seeing Alex for who he was. Anger that it had taken this long, and a strange sense of closure. Whatever came next was up to her. I'd said my piece, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could truly start moving on. The coffee shop was quiet, the kind of place where you could hear the soft hiss of the espresso machine and the occasional clink of a spoon against a ceramic cup. I sat at a corner table, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug, trying to steady the thoughts swirling in my head. Megan had asked to meet, and though part of me had wanted to say no, I couldn't resist the pull of closure. Or maybe it was just curiosity. Either way, here I was, staring at the door, waiting for her to arrive. She walked in a few minutes later, her shoulders hunched as if the weight of the past months had finally caught up to her. She looked different, less polished, more worn. Her usually perfect makeup was minimal, and there was a hesitation in her step that I hadn't seen before. "Ryan," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from me. "Megan," I replied, my tone even. I took a sip of my coffee, waiting for her to speak. She fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve, her eyes darting around the room before settling on me. "Thank you for meeting me," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded but didn't say anything, giving her the space to continue. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, her words slow and deliberate. About us. About everything. Have you? I asked, my voice tinged with skepticism. She flinched but pressed on. I know I messed up, Ryan. I know I let things with Alex get out of hand. And now... She paused, her voice cracking. Now I don't even recognize myself. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. What happened? She swallowed hard, her hands clasped tightly together. Alex started making explicit advances. At first it was just little things, comments, touches that I thought were harmless. But now, he's outright suggesting things, Ryan. Private meetings, trips. He's implying that my career depends on it. Her confession hit me like a punch to the gut, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed every suspicion I'd had. And you're just now realizing who he is? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. I thought I could handle it, she said, tears pooling in her eyes. I thought I could keep it professional, but he's manipulative, Ryan, and I let myself get pulled into his orbit. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You didn't just get pulled in, Megan. You walked into it. You let him into our lives, our marriage. Her tears began to fall, but I didn't soften. I know, she said, her voice trembling. I know I hurt you, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words settling between us. Finally, I leaned forward, my gaze steady. Megan, you made your choices, and those choices broke us. Trust isn't something you can just patch up with apologies. It takes years to build and seconds to destroy. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I know you are, I said, my tone softening slightly. But sorry doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase the nights I spent wondering if I mattered to you anymore. It doesn't fix the cracks in our marriage. Her shoulders shook as she cried, and for a brief moment I felt a pang of pity. But it wasn't enough to change my resolve. I needed to hear this, I said finally, standing up and placing a few bills on the table. And maybe you needed to say it. But this doesn't change where we are. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. So this is it? This was it the moment you let Alex take up more space in your life than I did, I said, my voice steady but firm. I hope you figure out who you are, Megan, but I can't be part of this anymore. I turned and walked out, the cool air hitting me as I stepped outside. As I stood by my car, I took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, and something else. Closure. For months, I'd been searching for answers, for some explanation that would make sense of what had happened. And while Megan's words didn't erase the pain, they gave me clarity. She was human, flawed, and lost in her own way. But that didn't excuse what she'd done, and it didn't mean I owed her another chance. Driving away from that coffee shop, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like it was truly mine to navigate. It didn't take long for Alex to show his true colors. Megan's call came late one evening, her voice shaking with frustration and fear. Ryan, I don't know who else to talk to, she said, the vulnerability in her tone catching me off guard. I hesitated before replying. What's going on, Megan? It's Alex, she began, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. He's turned against me. Ever since I rejected him, he's been shutting me out, excluding me from meetings, pulling me off projects, spreading lies about my work ethic. Ryan, I don't know what to do. Part of me felt a grim sense of satisfaction. This was the fallout I'd seen coming for months, the consequence of aligning herself with someone like Alex. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I'd fallen in love with, felt a twinge of pity. What did you expect? I said finally, trying to keep my tone even. You let him manipulate you for months. Now he's showing you what he's really like. She let out a shaky breath. I know I made mistakes, Ryan. I know I let him get too close. But I never thought. I didn't think it would get this bad. Over the next few weeks, I heard bits and pieces about her situation through mutual friends and even Rachel, who was still trying to mediate. Alex had gone from charming mentor to ruthless adversary, wielding his power to systematically dismantle Megan's reputation at the company. He's telling people she's difficult to work with, Rachel confided during one of her calls. That she's unreliable, that her success was all because of his guidance. It's like he's rewriting history. It was a cruel twist of fate. The very man she'd admired, the man she'd allowed into our lives, was now orchestrating her downfall. Megan reached out to me again, this time in person. She showed up at Liam's house one evening, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The confident, polished woman I once knew was gone, replaced by someone who seemed lost and broken. I just need you to hear me out, she said, her voice trembling. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. I'm listening. Tears welled up in her eyes as she spoke. I'm sorry, Ryan, for everything, for how I hurt you, for how I let Alex manipulate me. I see it now, the lies, the games. I thought I was in control, but I wasn't. I was blind. Her words were raw, unfiltered, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of the connection we used to have. But the damage was too deep, the trust too shattered. I appreciate your apology, I said, my tone measured. But it doesn't change what happened, Megan. You made your choices, and those choices had consequences. I don't want to lose you, she said, her voice breaking. You already did, I replied gently. And you need to start figuring out how to move forward without me. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears. I hope one day you can forgive me. I already have, I said, surprising even myself. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean going back. As she walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. Megan's fall was heartbreaking to witness, but it wasn't my responsibility to save her. I'd spent too long waiting for her to realize my worth, only to find that I needed to realize it for myself. She had her path to walk, and I had mine. For the first time in a long time, I felt ready to move forward. Alone, but stronger than ever. The day the divorce was finalized felt like both an end and a beginning. Sitting in that sterile office, signing my name for what felt like the 100th time, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and, above all, freedom. Megan wasn't there. We'd agreed to handle it separately. It was better that way. As I left the courthouse, the crisp air hit my face, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could truly breathe again. The weight of uncertainty, of trying to fix something irreparably broken, had been lifted. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew it was mine to shape. The weeks that followed were a blur of self-discovery. I dove back into hobbies I'd neglected, dusting off my old camera and venturing out to capture sunrises, hiking trails I'd always meant to explore, and even attempting to cook meals that didn't come from a box. Liam was a constant presence, always ready with a beer or a sarcastic remark to keep me grounded. My family, too, became a pillar of support. My niece, Emma, insisted on teaching me how to paint during one of her after-school art sessions. Let's just say I wasn't the next Picasso, but the laughter we shared was worth every botched attempt at a sunset. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again, or maybe a new version of myself, one who had been through the fire and come out the other side, scarred but stronger. One day, Liam convinced me to join a local hiking group. You need to meet people, he said, dragging me out of the house. And no, work colleagues don't count. Reluctantly, I agreed. The group met at a nearby trailhead, a mix of casual walkers and seasoned hikers. It was there that I met Emily. She was tying her bootlaces when I arrived, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and a welcoming smile on her face. "You're new," she said, her voice warm and easy. "Yeah," I replied, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. "First time out with the group." "Well, welcome," she said. "I'm Emily. Stick with me and I'll make sure you don't get lost." Her humor was disarming, and as we walked, our conversation flowed effortlessly. Emily was a teacher, passionate about nature and finding joy in the simple things. She spoke about her students with a light in her eyes that reminded me of what it felt like to truly love what you do. By the end of the hike, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. A spark. Not the overwhelming head-over-heels kind, but a quiet, steady warmth that made me want to know more about her. As I drove home that evening, I found myself smiling for no reason. Emily wasn't a cure for my pain or a solution to my problems. She was simply a reminder that life goes on, that connections can still be made, even after heartbreak. Sitting on my porch that night, looking up at the stars, I reflected on how far I'd come. The betrayal, the anger, the grief. It had all shaped me, but it didn't define me. I was stronger, more self-aware, and ready to embrace whatever came next. The scars of the past would always be there, faint reminders of what I'd endured. But they no longer felt like a burden. They were part of my story, a story that was still being written.